Welcome and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Rachel Maher and I am Park Pride's Director of Communications. Welcome to this session, Litter Hotspots from our Atlanta parks to the world's most polluted beach. Before we begin, this is just a reminder that only our presenters are going to be on screen for this session, but you will have a chance later to get on screen and interact and ask questions during the action groups. So for this session, just use the chat for discussion and questions, and we will be reviewing those questions as they come in and pulling out a bunch of them for the Q&A. So again, welcome everyone. Let's turn to the topic at hand, litter hotspots. How we manage litter and trash in our parks and open spaces can be enormously impactful to our watersheds nearby, as well as our coastal environments. During the COVID-19 pandemic, as parks and green spaces have experienced a swell in visitors, the Department of Parks and Recreation has reported a corresponding swell of trash and litter being left behind. In this session, we're going to look at the global impact of litter in our local public spaces as it migrates across the world through our river highway system and discuss solutions that lead to cleaner parks, creeks, and larger aquatic ecosystems. So I'd like to take the opportunity now to introduce everybody to our three panelists. First, Jordan Yu is Chattahoochee River Keeper's watershed protection specialist. He manages the day-to-day operations for 8 trash traps throughout the Chattahoochee Basin, and Jordan's going to tell us about those trash traps in just a little bit. We're also joined by Jon Radtke, who's the program director for water sustainability at Coca-Cola North America, where he's led Coke's water resources and water sustainability initiatives for the last 15 years. Welcome, Jon. Thanks for being here. And our final panelist is Brett Howell. He's the executive director and founder of the Howell Conservation Fund, whose focus is to achieve environmental conservation through sustainable solutions and education. Thank you all so much for being here. So for folks watching, I just want to remind you again that you can continue to drop any of your questions in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and we will be reviewing those during the Q&A closer to the end of the session. So Jordan, I would like to kick off this conversation with you and the work that you're doing at Chattahoochee River Keeper. River Keeper's mission is to ensure that there is enough clean water in the Chattahoochee River now and for future generations. So we're here today talking about trash. Can you tell me about the environmental and human impacts of trash in our waterways?
Absolutely. First off, the most visible issue with littering in our waterways is that it's visible. You can see it, and it makes our public spaces, our public waterways, less desirable for recreation, especially at a time when we're all stuck inside and our mental and physical well-being is dependent on how able we are to go outside and really enjoy kayaking, canoeing, that kind of thing. It really does take a toll to not be able to, or to be discouraged from using these spaces because of pollution. And of course, there's also the issue of microplastics in the water. Although the actual health effects on microplastics on humans, they're still being researched, we do know there's quite a bit of body of evidence that shows that microplastics from litter that is broken down in the watershed, those microplastics bioaccumulate in fish, in birds, and cause serious harm to their reproductive systems and whatnot. So there are impacts for humans and also for the ecosystem, and that extends from the upstream reaches of, say, the Chattahoochee River all the way down to West Point Lake, and of course on into the Gulf of Mexico.
And so part of the work that you're doing, we had mentioned trash traps earlier. Can you tell us more about what those are, why they're necessary, and how Chattahoochee River Keeper is involved in this project?
Right. So trash traps are these in-stream litter collection devices that capture trash that's floating down small tributaries before it can reach larger rivers and the ocean. Basically, they float up and down in the water, and the flow directs trash towards these either nets or baskets where it can then, the trash is collected, it can be sorted, the biological matter can be sorted from the recyclable and the litter, and all of that can be disposed of properly. What we do and what I do specifically is we help manage the day-to-day operations of the trash trap. So the maintenance needs, the clean out operations, and what we also do is gather data from the trash traps. We do these things called ETAPs. They're a forensic litter analysis. And I think Jon will get more into that later, but basically we collect this data to help us figure out what exactly is getting into our traps, where it's coming from, and maybe how we can stop it.
And so how can trash that's left in a park, for example, make its way into our waterways and then into those traps?
Right. So we're really looking at when it comes to litter, it's litter that's conveyed by the wind and the rain. Some people do just directly throw trash off of a bridge and into a stream, but most of the time it's littering on parking lots, sidewalks, green spaces, or it's litter that's blown out of overfull trash cans. And then the wind and the rain carries those pieces of litter into storm drains and into ditches, which then go on to tributaries, rivers, and then the ocean. And what we really see is our waterways are really good at concentrating litter. So if you look at, say, a large landmass, it may not visually look very impaired by litter, but once it rains, all of that litter will be concentrated in one urban stream where it really can cause a lot of harm to the wildlife there.
Mm-hmm. And what are the most common types of items that you're finding in the trash traps?
Yeah, the most common items are plastic items, and this is consistent across land-based cleanups and also beach cleanups. It's found at the bottom of the ocean, floating in the Pacific Gyre. It's a lot of single-use plastic items, mostly food and beverage packaging. For the trash traps that we operate, the three most commonly found items are plastic bags, water bottles, and all other types of plastic beverage bottles. So we actually make a distinction between water bottles are their own category, and then all juice bottles, sports drink bottles, etc. Those are all another category because we have to separate them out because there's just so many plastic bottles in the watershed. And most of the litter is also, it's fairly intact. So during our forensic litter analysis, we look at how degraded it is, whether or not the label's still there, whether or not it's been discolored by the sun or broken down by the waves. And we find that most of the litter is actually really clean, which suggests that it was littered recently. So that's another thing that kind of can pinpoint where exactly this litter is coming from and how old it is, and how long it has had to break down potentially.
Right, and you had mentioned that you are working on maintaining 8 trash traps. So what kinds of water bodies are best suited to have a trash trap?
Yeah, the main thing is we like to place them in places that have a lot of trash impairment. So that usually means urban streams that are downstream of, say, parks or event spaces or commercial areas, places where people may be gathering and littering. They're usually best suited for smaller tributaries. The 5 trash traps that we have in Proctor Creek, the stream there ranges from maybe 15 feet wide to 35 feet wide in places. These aren't really suitable for, say, the Chattahoochee River, the main stem of the river itself. And there's a number of reasons for that. there are concerns about navigation, getting permissions from the right government bodies, say the Army Corps of Engineers. What we found is that putting these devices in public parks has actually been really helpful because it smooths the permission process for actually, getting people to let us install these traps. And also it is public land and people can, when they're at the park, they can actually go visit these traps. There is an educational component to what we do. And when people see these traps in their public park, they get a sense that there is investment in their community, and it serves as sort of a conversation starter about a larger discussion about littering, microplastics, and whatnot. So we found that we do ideally like to put them in public parks or in public waterways when we can.
That's great. And yeah, I'm sure I have seen a couple of questions come in. And Jordan, I think folks are going to have other questions for you as well, sort of as this conversation goes on. So everybody, don't forget to drop any of your questions in the chat on the right-hand side of your screen. And during the last roughly 10 minutes for Q&A, we'll make sure to check those out and come back to them. Jon, I do want to transition to you. I understand that Coca-Cola and NRPA provided funding for the trash trap demonstration projects in Atlanta. So can you tell me a little bit about why Coke is interested in watersheds and litter?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rachel, and good morning, everybody. First of all, part of our company's mission is to make a positive difference in the communities where we operate. So, that's kind of the overriding angle that we come from. And I work on the sustainability team, so that's a lot of what drives my work. Secondly, Proctor Creek is literally in the backyard of our global headquarters, and so we've kind of focused on Proctor Creek for now to implement some of these programs that we have going around sustainability. So we have these goals. We have a lot of robust sustainability goals. One of them is around water. It's called a replenish goal, and I'll digress for just a minute because I really love this project, and it's done in partnership with Park Pride, and that's the Katherine Johnson Memorial Park. So we have a goal to return to nature and communities the same amount of water that we use in our beverages. So for every drop we use, we give one back. And we do that through projects that help restore watersheds and natural hydrologic function. And so working with Park Pride and NRPA, we were able to support this park, which is basically a stormwater management park. But it's a fantastic project. I encourage everybody to go out there and take a look. But just know under your feet, it's handling a whole bunch of stormwater that otherwise would have caused flooding. Now, this is in the upper part of the watershed. The creek that goes through here is actually, piped. But it's also in that part of the watershed where you still see a lot of litter. That litter goes down storm drains typically. And where does it eventually end up? In the main stem of Proctor Creek. So you can go to the next slide, Rachel. Another goal that we have is called World Without Waste. And that's our goal to collect and recycle an equivalent of every package that we put out into the market. And there's other components of the goal too, like using recycled material in our packages, making sure we design our packages so that they're 100% recyclable. But really the hardest part is collecting this material. And most of the work is around landfill diversion, and trying to get people to just recycle curbside and whatnot. But there is this component of our packages that end up totally in the wrong place and then in the environment. And it gets in the waterways and eventually in the oceans. And that's the part that, we find most people are the most passionate about. So I'm kind of leading our North America strategy around marine litter. So, of course, you can do cleanups, and we do a whole bunch of cleanups, and Chattahoochee River Keeper is just fantastic at running cleanups. But what happens is you go back to those same spots, after a big rain or, much less the next year, and there's trash right back in there. So we started investigating these passive trap devices that will collect this floating trash year round. And that's what drove us to working with NRPA, the city, Chattahoochee River Keeper, Park Pride, this whole collection of partners, and where we were able to provide funding and install some of these traps in Proctor Creek. There's two kinds of traps that were installed. One's the band-along, if you can see the picture in the middle, that's the big, more substantial device. And it's permanent, stays there, but it's really great at capturing basically everything that floats down there, including leaves and sticks and stuff. But the way we manage those, we're able to separate that out and actually collect the real trash part. But we also wanted to try out and pilot a more smaller, more nimble, and frankly, cheaper solution. And that's why we turned to the litter getter. And the litter getter, at first, we thought it might only be applicable on really small tributaries, storm drains, things like that. But we decided to pilot it in the main stem of Proctor Creek as well. And as you know, that river's or the creek's pretty flashy. So much impervious surface that after it rains, that it really gets roaring down there. And so we're figuring out how these smaller devices can, work in that type of environment. Are they robust enough? And it turns out they're doing a great job. And if you get really big rains or huge logs that come down, it might knock it away. And then you just go and pick it up, downstream on the bank, and you can put it back. So we like the fact that they're nimble. Both of them are working great. You can see the dots on the map. And I know it's small and it's hard to see, but we've placed these, as Jordan said, kind of strategically near several parks. And for various reasons, one of which, though, is it'll get a lot more eyes on it and raise awareness to this issue. Hopefully get people to start thinking about, oh, my trash does go somewhere. Maybe I shouldn't throw it on the ground. Also, Jordan alluded to this ETAP program, Escape Trap Assessment Protocol, I guess is what the P stands for. And so after they empty the trash, and we use local workers who have been specifically trained, and usually from the underserved community through Groundwork Atlanta, to actually do the management of the traps, and they get paid, a good wage to do this. But they're trained to do this ETAP, and they count the trash, separate out the recyclables, so we can definitely recycle what can be recycled. The rest goes into a landfill. But then they also record exactly what they're collecting, so we can get an idea of where it's coming from. Is it coming in this stretch mostly from a convenience store? And you can tell the styrofoam cups or the color of the bags. And then what the plan is, the next step, which we haven't gotten there yet, we're still evaluating the data, is to formulate a real strategy and plan around stopping it at the root cause. So you can go to the next slide, Rachel. Yeah. And one of the things that we're trying to do is use this as a pilot, get learnings from it, and then spread it out as much as we can. We want to scale this up. If you can see that little map in the middle where the yellow stars are, that's where we've implemented similar projects and have these litter getters installed through CocaCola supported funding. And so it is starting to broaden, and we're doing whatever we can and leveraging the voice of our company to get the word out. And we know that we're a part of the problem, obviously, with plastic in the environment. So many of our packages end up in the wrong place. So we really want to be part of that solution. So we're holding events. We had a big event whenever we put the trash traps in the first place, and got a lot of publicity, and TV was there and everything. We did radio spots, so you can hear on V103 and Star 94 talking about the trash traps. The EPA administrator Wheeler even came down, and I forgot to say the EPA has been a big partner in this as well. Came down to visit, and so we had a big event around that too. And then lastly, we have developed a playbook, if you will, on how to implement these trash traps in your community, how you select the right ones, how you get local support, and that's was done through River Network. So we supported a grant there. So anyway, I think we got a long way to go. We're just starting to scale this up, and as you know, this is not just a Proctor Creek problem. It's not just a U.S. problem. It's even a bigger problem globally. And we're a bit global company, so we're trying to address this everywhere. And it's, we just need all hands on board. This is a problem that we all need to get together to solve. And so I'm going to leave it at there and turn it over to Brett to kind of talk more about this global scale.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really great transition that you set up there, Jon. So Brett, you're here, you're gonna, bring us to the bigger picture, take us to the global scale and why managing our trash, whether in our parks, our public spaces, and even at our homes, matters on the global scale. So you led the summer 2019 beach cleanup team at Henderson Island, which is considered the world's most polluted beach. So I'm really interested to hear more about that experience, but first, I think it would be helpful for us to set the stage in the situation at Henderson Island with a quick video. So let me cue that up.
People have never lived on Henderson Island, but we've still left our mark in a devastating way. Tons of rubbish is washing up on the beach, threatening wildlife and offering a stark reminder of our addiction to plastic.
A beautiful vista with a horrible name. Welcome to Trash Island, a pinprick in the Pacific, wedged almost dead centre between New Zealand and South America. Henderson Island, as it's known to cartographers, is one of the planet's most remote outcrops of land, never inhabited by human. Yet it is estimated that every square metre of beach there is between 600 to 700 pieces of plastic.
We're in a World Heritage Site, this pristine beach, and you expect to come down off of this cliff and just have breathtaking views, and you absolutely do. But every step you take, there's a piece of plastic.
2 years after this island registered the highest density of plastic debris ever recorded, estimated to be 18 tonnes worth. A team of scientists and environmentalists recently returned to study its effects on nature.
It surely wouldn't take too much of an imbalance of plastic or something else to really disturb the flora and fauna here.
Ringed by reef, it is difficult to access and dangerous to leave. The team forced to overnight on the beach after overturning their inflatable boat.
Oh, we're right here. We're not getting up no matter where we go.
But the expedition's aim was to also try and clean up.
I use some of those products. I recognise things that I use. Now, I don't go flipping into the ocean, but, those are things that I use.
6 tonnes would be bagged. But given 300 million tonnes of plastic is produced worldwide each year, each gram buoyant and durable, plastic will continue to have a long-term impact on the seas, those animals who live by and in them, and the views that we cherish.
It's really sad.
Mike Dalton, 9 News.
Hi, YouTubers. I'm
Wow, Brett, that's pretty scary and really sad, quite frankly. But help us connect the dots. What does the world's most polluted beach have to do with Atlanta's parks?
Great question. Thanks everybody for joining us this morning. As Nemo said, the lovable clownfish and the Disney Pixar classic, Finding Nemo, all drains lead to the ocean. In this case, that couldn't be more true, right? Garbage that starts in Atlanta has every potential of ending up on Henderson Island or on Georgia's beautiful coastline. We sometimes forget that Georgia is a coastal state, but we do have 100 miles of coastline out near Savannah. And you can easily imagine a product flowing down Proctor Creek, ending up in one of those barrier islands or somewhere else. We traced back those 14,000 pounds best we could. As Jordan mentioned, in the case of Atlanta, the top products are plastic bags and beverage containers among them. For example, interestingly, We didn't have any plastic bags because they were so degraded. You ended up having sort of the little bit at the top you might with a hefty bag tie off, but everything else was gone, right? The entire bag had broken apart. We, of course, found sort of products from across the human supply chain, from flip-flops to fishing gear to beverage containers. As Jon pointed out, obviously Coca-Cola is the world's largest beverage company. We did find Coca-Cola products on the beach, small percentage of it. Recent data coming from Dr. Jenna Jambak of the University of Georgia has actually recently, just in the past couple of weeks, sort of helped point even more the importance of Atlanta and the United States overall. That study looked at 2016 data, which is the most recent we have for plastic production, and found that the U.S. was the #1 producer of plastic. Not overly surprising. Americans are the #1 users per capita of plastic, and more than likely the United States is between #1 and #3 top polluters of the ocean, which is very kind of a different story than what we thought it was. It has sort of started its journey driven by Dr. Jambak going back to 2015.
Mm-hmm. And so bringing it back around to trash traps, what's happening internationally that might impact the way we think about trash traps in Atlanta and the U.S. more broadly?
Yeah, as Jon mentioned, the EPA has been a great partner on this. Just in the past couple of weeks, also, the EPA has released an extended plan, including funding of what we could possibly do to focus more on trash traps. It was fantastic to have the Administrator Wheeler down here in March looking at trash traps. I tend to think that helped influence kind of this report somewhat, and as an example of what happens with collaboration, right? When you work across public, private, philanthropic. Also, Pew Charitable Trust has been doing a significant amount of work internationally. They've recently also had studies come out showing that in the next 20 years, we could likely reduce 80% of the garbage just using current technologies and sort of approaches, right? From everything from upstream to trash traps, et cetera. It's easy to think about, tons and tons of garbage. In the case of Henderson Island, we collected 6 tons for about 14,000 pounds, right? And kind of getting lost by the numbers. But what I find is important is to think about, where can you start individually? Where can your family start? Where can your community start to make a difference on this, right? And as we already talked about, the trash from Atlanta has the potential to end up in the ocean. So if we take some simple steps to begin with, packing it in, packing it out, making sure that you never end up with garbage, to the best of your knowledge, that you've thrown in Proctor Creek, right? I mean, that's a great place to start. Jordan touched on the idea of microplastics, and something the scientists on our team said is plastics don't break up, they break down, right? Part of what makes Henderson Island the most plastic polluted is the amount of microplastics there. And there was just no way we could attempt to overcome all of that. But it's one of these, start where you are and see what your relationship with plastic is, and then see what else you can go out and influence.
That's great. Thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating conversation, and I do want to make sure that folks have an opportunity to have their questions answered. So while I am going through the chat to pull out some questions, one question that I do want to ask that I'm sure is on the top of everybody's mind, what can we do? How can volunteers get involved to keep trash out of our parks and waterways?
Yeah, so just speaking for CRK, we do a lot of direct action cleaning up both the land and the water. A great activity to get out and sort of make a small impact is to sign up for a cleanup day, go out, or just when you're out enjoying a park, picking up litter that you see around. Like I said earlier, littering, if there's litter already in a public space, it inspires more littering. And so just doing a little bit to not only pack out what you've taken, but also take a little bit with you, or maybe carry a garbage bag when you're paddling or you're along the beach. Just picking up a little bit of litter. If you all do that, that'll help chip away at the problem and hopefully lead to a longer term change in behavior if people see that there's people are really investing and people care about these public spaces, then hopefully that'll inspire other people who otherwise might be inclined to litter.
Yeah, that's great. And I do want to remind folks as well that there will actually be an action group after this session, and after the break, we'll break into action groups. And there is an action group focused on Leave No Trace. And so brainstorming different ideas for what we as volunteers can do to, sort of be the first line of defense in this battle against litter. I'm looking at one question in the chat from Andrew White. Have you noticed a reduction in pollution downstream since the trash traps were installed?
It is a little bit hard to quantify, unfortunately. Parker Creek is heavily trash impaired, and unfortunately, we didn't do a full diagnostic beforehand. That would require a full sweep of the watershed, categorization of everything that was already in there. So we don't have an exact, baseline that we could compare it to before and after. But visually, you can see, all of the trash that we collect in the trash traps, and that's hundreds of pounds per trap in the last year. All of that is trash that we know would otherwise go downstream. And so you can see upstream there'll be, plastic floating in the water that is prevented from going downstream from those traps, and then downstream it is visually clearer. But as far as the quantitative analysis, it's a little bit difficult just because there are so many variables involved.
Mm-hmm. Brett, can you provide, I think there was a short piece of it at the beginning of the video, but where is Henderson Island? And then if you were to look out, 5 to 10 years in the future, what do you see for the future of Henderson Island and our waterways?
Yeah, so Henderson Island is one of the world's most remote islands, right? The closest reference points would be New Zealand and South America. And it's smack in the middle of that. Literally, when you are on the island, your next closest human is in the International Space Station, if it happens to be in the right spot in the sky. If you look at, the distance across the planet or distance straight up, it's easier distance straight up. Getting to your point about, what we see for the future of Henderson Island, I'm an optimist, right? We've hit the tipping point on plastic pollution, ocean plastic pollution, river plastic pollution. You have these amazing organizations coming together and bringing the entire supply chain, and think of it as sort of reverse supply chain, right? I think of these trash traps as reverse supply chain, and that the trash got out somehow and we want to get it back. And there's this idea called circular economy, which has been going around the past couple years, which is really an aggregation of past ideas that if we can make one product and keep reusing it instead of being linear, right? We can use it continuously in a circle, remaking different products out of it. I think we'll get ourselves to a situation where we actually really solve this. So our approach is that through radical collaboration, taking on really, really challenging stakeholder issues, we can drive catalytic change, as we were able to do with the Henderson Island project, right? Cleaning up 14,000 pounds was representative, but it was a perfect example of having a media team to scientists to a plastic pollution artist. Who would have thought there'd ever be such a thing, right? Coming together for about a month to really drive change here, and then being able to have that story being told globally, right? There's many Henderson Islands. It happens to be the world's most plastic polluted beach, unfortunately, but any island, Georgia's coast, anywhere, unfortunately, you can walk along and see this garbage. And the hope is that through these collaborations, we'll solve this. And again, we can make beaches as pristine as the image behind Jon's head there. So you could walk down the beach and actually pick up seashells and not instead be picking up plastic.
Awesome.
I wanted to add one point to that. And I remember I was actually sitting in the West Wing of the White House having a discussion with various people about solving this problem. And we could spend the next week full day every day talking about all the different complexities and solutions to plastic problem. I mean, it's just enormous, from infrastructure to whatever. But what I came down to is, all right, we need to put something in our waterways to just turn off that tap that's just continually to flush plastic out while we're working on the rest of these issues, around promoting recycling, circular economy, building infrastructure, all that. So there's multiple steps to it, but I think the first step is let's get as many devices in there as we can to start cutting off that tap, and eventually, hopefully, we won't even need those anymore. We'll be able to take them out and say, all right, our root cause is solved.
Yeah.
And Jon, I think that relates to a question that I'm seeing from Alex in the chat. In public parks, especially in the city, who builds and maintains trash traps? Is that the Parks Department? Is that watershed? So
we'll use a contractor who basically they own or have licenses for these devices, whether it's a bandalong or litter getter. Stormwater Solutions is a local one for the bandalong, and we use this company called Osprey Initiative out of Mobile for the litter getters. They are responsible for installing the traps. They have the team and they're trained. As far as the maintenance, which actually when you get to these things, the ongoing maintenance is probably the real cost. You have to figure out a model for that. And part of a pilot that we're doing is figuring out that model. So, you pay people to manage it. That can get expensive. And Coca-Cola, for instance, we're willing to do the initial investment, get these things going, get it going for a year, but we can't just continue to pay in perpetuity, keep these going. So we want to find that solution locally, and it's a combination. Sometimes the city will pick it up, and in our case, the city Parks Department is going to be picking up, I believe it's Parks, is going to be picking up the maintenance of the bandalong at least. We're relying on Chattahoochee River Keeper to manage the litter getters through a combination of volunteers and maybe paid positions. And I know, Jordan, you're focusing on that a lot, but I'm thinking that kind of hybrid model might be the way forward. Jordan, you might have some more to add to that.
Oh, absolutely. CRK has a volunteer program called Neighborhood Water Watch, whereby volunteers from the community go out and sample water for E. coli testing. And we've built a robust network that way. And so we'd like to get to a position where we can utilize that network, or maybe a similar one, to have a pool of volunteers that can come help clean out these traps when appropriate. There are obviously concerns with scheduling. There are safety concerns. You need to be able to lift 50 pounds and have a pair of waders to clean out these traps. So there are some concerns there, but I definitely see that as the way forward.
Also, one thing that I worry about is if you go strictly to volunteerism, this is dirty, nasty kind of work, and so you might be a case where, okay, people say, yeah, I want to do it, and they do it once and then say, all right, I'm not going to do it again. And you just can't have that. It's not sustainable that way. So we got to figure that out.
Well, everybody, this has been fascinating. I am so sad that we didn't get to a lot of questions in the chat. There's talk about biodegradable plastics and whether or not it would be possible for, a return fee for plastic bottles in Georgia, questions about flooding. All of this looks like really great questions and conversations all on their own. For the three of you, if people have questions for you, is there a way that they can get in touch?
Yeah, if you can get in touch, my email is jyu@chattahoochee.org. I'm always available. I love educating people. We do visits to elementary schools in Proctor Creek, and part of my job is to just talk about trash traps all day. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions people may have.
Great.
Go ahead, Jon.
And I'll put out my email as well. So it's jradtke@coca-cola.com. And I will try to answer your emails. Just like everybody else, I probably get over 100 a day, but I'm passionate about this program and this subject, and so I'll try to answer your questions.
Yeah, in my case, if you go to howellconservation.org, you can reach out to us through that, or my email address is Brett, B-R-E-T-T, at howellconservation.org.
Great. Thank you all so much. And for everybody watching, if you want to continue to talk trash, let's definitely all get together in the Leave No Trace action group. I believe Brett is going to be joining us. And we look forward to seeing everybody there, and enjoy the rest of the big park meeting.